Welcome to Sessions with the Crossing. My name is Jake, and over the next few weeks, we'll be talking about the book of Daniel. Each week, we will be diving into a specific conversation and hearing a group of people have a discussion about the same topic. Now, if you're part of the Crossing, this accompanies the Among Lions series and guide. You can listen to this or watch this and make it a part of your group discussion or help spur some of your own thoughts. And if you're not a part of the Crossing and you found this or someone sent it to you, I still believe that this will be helpful as we touch on different topics. The book of Daniel tells about keeping faith and hope in the midst of oppression and defeat, and staying faithful in a culture that directly clashes with yours. I think there's both good news and bad news for us. The bad news is that people who have been trying to follow God have always and will always have to live out their faith in a hostile environment. The good news is that people who have followed God have always found ways to live faithfully and with the favor of God, no matter the circumstances, the people, or the places they have found themselves in. So when we look at the book of Daniel, we aren't just looking at history, we're looking at a case study with implications of how we should live our lives today. Daniel begins right after the Babylonian Empire's first attack on the city of Jerusalem. And as a part of the attack, they plundered the city and took people from the royal and noble families captive, including 4 young men we know as Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. To be honest, the story starts with something that seems pretty benign. The captives aren't being tortured. They aren't being put into forced labor. Instead, they are being fed from the table of the Babylonian emperor. Cultural pressure isn't always overt oppression. After all these young men had been through, captured, ripped from their families and their homes, why can't they have some good food? Don't they deserve something nice? Does food matter that much? Back when God freed the Israelites from slavery in Egypt, he established a set of rules and laws that set the new nation apart from the other nations surrounding them. This was in order to be a witness and testimony about God to the rest of the world. And part of that covenant included dietary restrictions. And so when the 4 young men were given food from the king's table, they were confronted with a seemingly small choice with large consequences. Instead of caving to the king or justifying a simple choice to eat the food that they were given, they chose to live differently. They chose to stay faithful. There's so much we could say about that and learn from their story, but I want to focus on the power of community. I wonder what would have happened if it had just been one young man in the beginning. I know if it were me, that would have been a much harder thing to face. Thankfully, they didn't have to face that first situation on their own. They had each other. In order to live counterculturally, in order to stay faithful in a society that doesn't care and even actively works against your faith, you need a community of people who will be there with you. Proverbs says that a strand of 3 cords isn't easily broken. And we know the truth of that statement. One of the things that we say at the Crossing is that life change happens best in relationships. It's the relationships that help us stay on our journey with Jesus. It's our relationships that help us resist giving into the culture around us. It's our community that helps us make the right small choices because we know that they have big consequences. And when we miss out on that community, everything about our journey of faith gets harder. These 4 young men made the right and faithful choice, and they did it together. Well, welcome, Josiah, Tori, Austin. Thanks so much for joining in on this conversation about the book of Daniel and really focusing on countercultural community and how that impacts our own faith. And so how do you guys feel like community ends up shaping your values, your beliefs, your life?
I think, what's interesting is when you talk about community, you said countercultural community.
Yeah.
But I think there's an element of culture that we could really bring into this, because every podcast, YouTuber, influencer, like, show me the 5 people you surround yourself, I'll show you who you're going to be in 5 years.
Right.
And I really do think that's true in the Christian community aspect as well. Like, if you're completely surrounded by people that are, doing the wrong things, you're going to become those people. Whereas if you're also surrounding yourself by people who are pursuing God,
right,
you're going to become like them like that and become more Christ-like because of that.
Absolutely.
I don't know. When I think about Daniel specifically, he had a foundation so that when he was around a counterculture, it didn't have the same impact as if he didn't have the foundation with his relationship with Christ.
Right, right.
So then he was able to be a part of a counterculture that really went against everything that he believed in, that he stood for, that he held as values and sacred. And yet he was able to have influence because he had a daily relationship with Jesus.
Yeah, that's part of the challenge I think that we see in Daniel and that we take on as people of faith, Christians, which is like we're not called to be people that are completely removed from the world, but we're also not called to be people who are completely a part of the world where there's no difference to us. And so we have to be engaged enough with the world around us, yet live differently enough to make a difference. And so I think a lot of times we need a balance of community that will help us to have the strength to live differently while still being connected to the larger world for their good.
Yeah, for me personally, like in my life, I have community within the church, within my own friends that follow Jesus, but also I have community outside of the church as well. Just trying to be that Christ-like to those people, just showing love and care to all of them as well. So I just have like what Tori was saying, a foundation of kind of my own values of what my day-to-day life looks like, and I just hold true to that throughout my life.
Have you found that, like, what has been helpful in building that community? How have you built that? How has that community, in whatever your lives, been the most helpful in helping you hold on to your faith or to your values? What does that look like, and how do you build that?
For me personally, it has to be intentional. It's not going to just happen. And so I have a group of girlfriends that I know that their walk with Jesus is really strong. And I know that when mine isn't, or when I'm struggling, or when I don't have faith or grace or all the things I should have, that they're there to talk with me. They're there to pray with me. They're there to remind me of who God is and what his promises are for me. And that community, and I mean, hopefully I do the same for them, right? Like iron sharpens iron. But then having that community of like-minded people really helps then when I'm faced with just cultural things. For example, like just having this idea of striving, that culture is just like, you've got to hustle, you've got to make it happen, you've got to do all the things, you're enough, you.
Right.
And yet they remind me, it's not all up to you. You show up and you do your best, but you have to trust that God has got you in this.
Right.
And so kind of having that balance, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
My wife and I have a couple friends. When we first started hanging out with them, we'd get in the car after, and that's I think the most honest moment. Like like you're hanging out with friends.
Absolutely.
And for those people, when we were with them, we would turn to each other. I feel like I'm a better follower of Christ because of this last hour, this last 2 hours.
Right.
And I think that's when you have the right people surrounding you, is when in that honest moment when you leave, it's, oh, wow, I learned something, or my spirit is full because of this.
Yeah.
And, there are friends that aren't going to let you get away with a bad attitude without going, hey, what's really going on under the surface?
Right. Making you better.
Yeah, for me, just being kind of younger and trying to figure out kind of my life, but everyone else still is trying to figure out life. For me, just community, I feel like growing up, you kind of change your community a little bit, your friend groups, trying to figure out kind of what your standards are for friends, what your community looks like. Just being with the younger generation, kind of talking with them, 7th graders. I lead out a 7th grade group, just trying to tell them that you have to hold yourself high, your high standards, just trying to figure out what your life is going to look like. I'm still trying to figure out kind of my main community, like my main core.
Right.
Still trying to figure that out. But yeah, kind of what Josiah was saying, if you have a group of friends, community that you can talk to and feel open enough to talk to, I feel like you found your correct community that you can just be open and honest with as well.
Yeah, and I think it's about not only the idea that this community is going to help me follow Jesus and they're going to help me grow in my own faith and spirituality, but these people are also there for like the real moments of my life, right? They're there when, I need a babysitter. If I were to get sick, all of this stuff is just like, oh no, hey, I'm there to take you to the airport. There's like that sense of community of, hey, I know that I have people that I can trust and rely on. And that makes a huge difference when I'm faced with making choices that may have other consequences to my life. Even as we consider looking at Daniel and going like, oh, Daniel and his friends choosing to eat different food, that has a set of consequences. But if I'm doing that with a group of people, I'm more easily able to make a choice like that, I think. So then as you look at community, then how do you think, like, obviously it's like I want to have high standards. I want people around me that I can rely on like that. How do you also be a person that contributes to that kind of community?
You can't be that person without pursuing Christ yourself. You've got to be, and that's why I really like this Daniel series that we're doing, is because there's this daily devotional aspect that we get to do. And some of the best transformation that I have had in my life is through having daily uninterrupted devotional time. And it doesn't have to be something so difficult. Like what is outlined in the Daniel Among Lions book that you'll see is it's one page and a half of reading and a couple reflective questions. Let your quiet time begin like that. Let the Holy Spirit start doing it, but don't do it one day. Be consistent. Carve that 10 minutes out every single day for the next 30, 35 days to really let God speak to you and see, wow, what is God doing now that I was unaware of, or what has he been doing in my life that would not be happening if I was not being intentional with this time? And who is he surrounding me with? And what opportunities am I seeing in my daily life because of this? And God will transform you.
I love that. Like that we have to be responsible for bringing something to the community, right? And that starts with our own relationship with Jesus and trying to follow him. Any other thoughts on, like, this is how you bring your best to that community?
I think you have to be willing to be authentic. If you're going to be a part of a community and it's always just surface level, then that's all it's ever going to be, And when Josiah, when you were saying that, when people know you well enough, like you were talking into your small group and go, okay, wait, something's not right. Like being willing to be vulnerable with that group and realize they're a safe space and let them be a part of those hard things, and allowing people to love on you, allowing yourself to be vulnerable and receive, yet give. Yeah. I think you have to show up willing to be both.
Right. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, for me, just being honest and being like, if you don't have like your community, you just need to be more open and honest. I feel like if you're not, then you don't have that faith and that trust with them. I just feel like being honest is always hard for a lot of people. Like in this like world right now, it's hard to kind of like trust people, trying to like, you like keeping stuff inside. That's kind of what, like, I'm an introvert, so it's hard for me to kind of open up to people unless I truly like trust them. So that's just something I've learned about my community. Like, okay, I can trust them. I can open up and kind of push myself spiritually and push them as well spiritually along the way.
And I think along with that, as you try and build trust in an environment where you can share and all of those things, is trying to figure out how do you for me, one of the biggest hurdles to community is just like the consistently showing up, right? Which is like, life's busy. Everybody's life is busy. Trying to find that time and then like sticking to that time. Every time I like have to like go to a small group, I'm like, is there a way I can get out of this? Like, is there some way to cancel this?
There's always those weeks you're like, I really don't want to go.
I really don't want to, and then you have to choose to do it anyway.
Yeah.
And every time I've chosen to do it anyway, it's been worth it.
That's
totally worth it.
Yep.
Always.
But like, there's that hurdle in the beginning where you're just like, am I feeling sick?
Yeah.
How can I get out? But it's that intentionality and choosing to be there over and over again that makes a difference.
I think it's making it a priority too.
Right.
Like, I mean, we wake up in the morning and we don't necessarily want to go to work, but we get dressed and we go to work.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
there's
because we know
times-
that like there's a benefit, there's
Right.
a paycheck that comes out of that.
This is
right.
true.
And it's kind of the same thing, whether it's that coffee date that you scheduled and now you're like, oh, I just don't want to go.
Right.
Yeah.
But you know, when you get there, it's going to be good.
Absolutely.
Same thing with small
Yeah.
group or whatever the thing is.
It's worth it.
It's worth it.
Well, this has been a discussion about how to have a countercultural community that will help us to live out our faith in a world that is sometimes hostile to it. And so thanks so much for sharing what's been working in your life. And our hope is that this conversation continues with people, that they can find their own countercultural community that helps them be faithful to God and on their own journey of faith. So thanks so much for joining us on this episode, this very first episode of our podcast. We're looking forward to the next 5 weeks as we continue to dive into the book of Daniel and find our own hope and faith from his story.